and green economy transition. The recent withdrawal of the US from the Paris Agreement and the cuts in foreign aid to Africa raises fundamental questions. Are US foreign aid cuts a wake-up call for African climate self-reliance? Will the progress made in securing climate finance for Africa be impacted, or can it push the continent towards financial independence and stronger policy frameworks? So these are the questions we are going to be debating today. I have a set of two teams with me today. They are members of the cohort, and they will just briefly unmute themselves and introduce themselves to you. So I will start with the team in support of. Thank you. Just 1 minute each. Thank you.
All right. Do I go first, or Niriko, you'd like to go first?
You can go first.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. My name is Bilha Luseka. I am a Zillennial, a creative storyteller who's very passionate about tackling climate education in Africa. And through my social enterprise, The African Cool Kid, I'm determined to make climate change a part of everyday conversations. My dream is to make climate change and sustainability taught in schools, because every young child should have access to sustainable practices as early as possible. And I'm honored to support this motion because, yes, US foreign aid cuts are a wake-up call for Africa's climate finance self-reliance. This issue is very personal for me. My friend who just lost a round of funding for a project that he had spent over a year getting approval for, I think about him all the time. Just think of the time, energy, and resources that he has spent to make this dream a reality. His livelihood gone. His mental health is in shambles. But most of all, think of the futures of all the communities that he was going to transform. Year after year, we remain trapped in cycles of dependency. Foreign aid cuts shake economies, disrupt projects, and stall progress. This cannot continue to be our story.
Thank you, Bilha. Thank you so much. Raissa, you're next.
Okay, thank you. My name is Niriko Jouberthe Raissa Razafiarivony. I come from in the beautiful island of Madagascar, and I am a program coordinator at Action for Community and Biodiversity. I am passionate about advocating for the climate change and climate change adaptation education in the coastal area of my country. So I am arguing for the motion that the U.S. foreign aid cuts is the wake-up call for Africa to take ownership of its climate future, because reducing the dependency of the on financial investment from the external strengths build long-term sustainability for the African climate investment. So it's as long as we are depending from external aids to mitigate the impact of the climate change in our continent, we are still remaining vulnerable, because those external aids might depend on the let's say the administration, the foreign policies, priorities, and it depends on many factors. So I am proudly arguing for these motions just to for the sustainable climate future in Africa.
Thank you, Raissa. Thank you so much. You just jump right in, team against.
Hi, everyone. My name is Valentine Tenge. I'm from Kenya. I'm an investment professional, currently working as a consultant with investment banks in terms of helping develop green portfolios for listed debt and equity, and also for private equity investments. Based on my recent experience, I'm here to, support the motion. I'm against the motion actually that pulling out foreign aid would be, detrimental to Africa's current situation. Based on my previous experience working with early and growth stage companies and understanding the real funding needs on ground that are needed. So I'm here to support the notion that while foreign aid has developed a not so friendly reputation in Kenya and in Africa generally, there are ways to navigate and have more effective ways of foreign aid or international support and cooperation. And an economist, my background is in economics, so a strong believer in comparative advantage. So you focus on what you can do best and you outsource what you can do best to other nations or other parties in any case, whether it's economic development or personal life. So yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you, Valentine. And Howard, you're next.
Great. Thank you so much. As introduced, my name is Howard Mwesigwa, and I'm from Uganda. I am an energy and climate justice advocate, and I'm really delighted to be joining in this afternoon to oppose this motion. And I think as an introduction, I just need to highlight the fact that opposing this motion, we are not rejecting African self-reliance. That is not our position. What we are actually saying is that we must take due cognizance of the complex financial, historical, and ethical dimensions of climate finance. Yeah. So while African nations must continue strengthening domestic climate finance mechanisms locally, we strongly believe as team opposition that these abrupt aid reductions could have severe humanitarian, economic, environmental consequences. Yes, but we must also take into account the long-standing principles that the polluter must pay for the pollution they are creating, but also with the consideration of the respective capabilities, the common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities. And so we think that it's not a wake-up call per se. We must not condone, a nation which is the biggest emitter, historical emitter, withdrawing finance that is intended to clean up its mess. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a beautiful startup, people. So we're gonna just dive right in. Answering the questions. A U.S. foreign aid cuts a wake-up call for Africa's climate finance self-reliance. Should African reduced dependency and build its climate finance mechanism? Should Africa reduce its dependency on the West and build its climate finance mechanism? Or do many African nations depend on external climate finance? And these cuts could just be a huge delay to the green transition. You can take this up first, Tim Ford.
Niriko, would you like to begin?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Awaakeh. According on my point of view, it's time for Africa to take ownership of their climate future investment, and the one of the most pressing regions for Africa to pursue climate finance self-reliance is the inherent instability of foreign aids. And the U.S. foreign aid is subject to political cycles, changing administrations, and the shifting foreign policies priorities. And this is not the first time for the U.S. To attempt to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. That was happened in 2017, which is unsuccessful before, and withdrawal from that time has impacted many projects of climate adaptation in Africa, which under the U.S. funding, right? And yeah, why not, if we are African countries, take care of ourselves, of our climate issues? We should build like sustainable solution, innovative solution that can we that can um strive that can that can address the climate issues in our countries, because in our continent, because this is our continent. We have to take responsibility of it, and we have a lot of resources that can be mobilized to get benefits or profits from our let's say our natural resources from our continent, and building some local partnership like those in the other continent too, making some partnership from the public and private sectors, which is already successful in South Africa, from the renewable energy in partnership of the private and public sectors. That's
Thank you, Niriko. Thank you, Niriko. So to the team that is against the motion, the same questions. Should Africa reduce dependency and build its climate finance mechanisms? Or we have too many nations that's depending on extender climate finance, and these costs just might delay the green transition? You go ahead.
I think I'll start off by addressing the situation. So what happens when the US pulls out foreign aid, and what's left on our plate? So what's left on the African plate is we will now depend on a fully market-based economic environment, where investment flows in and out of Africa will then depend on perceived risks and returns. However, I feel that foreign aid is just one of the many faces of foreign influence. So instead of, once we have such a situation, we then end up with a situation where we rely on risk premium ratings, which determine borrowing costs and investment attractiveness. And yet again, you still find the US and the Western nations with their hand in the cookie jar, determining what risk premiums are, relevant for the African market. And at the end of the day, you now end up with market conditions that are handicapped by financial structures that are not really reflective of, what's happening in Africa. Why has Africa over time relied on foreign debt, on foreign aid? In this case, it has been because of these very high borrowing costs. You find that African nations pay 7 to 15% interest on sovereign bonds, while Western nations borrow at as low as 1 to 3%. So this is sort of a self-fulfilling cycle where we are looking at foreign aid as the elephant in the room, when it really is not, the elephant in the room. Point number 2 goes to resource dependence. So as long as we argue that Africa needs to remain self-reliant, and yet we are exporting, a large part of our exports are raw materials, and we end up with, very, products that have low value. We're not getting market value for it. Doing away with foreign aid is just cutting one arm of the octopus and remaining with 7 others, and, still having foreign influence in Africa and whatnot. So in my opinion, I believe that if you're going to do away with foreign aid, you might as well do away with risk premium ratings, exploitation, and ensure that we have fair trade in Africa. That's it. I think I will invite.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Valentine. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we will move on to the next question for the sake of time. Has foreign aid historically hindered true progress in Africa because it comes with limitations and conditions, or is foreign aid a key enabler for securing solutions? So this time around, we're going to start with the team that is against the motion. Kick on, people. Come on.
All right. So I'm just going to set the scene here. Has anyone watched the movie Wakanda? Didn't watching that movie just make you feel so empowered, so powerful? And did it make you realize just how amazing Africa can be? That's my dream for Africa, an Africa that is not waiting for handouts but designing its own future on its own terms. This is not fiction, actually. You know, before we were colonized and conditioned to believe that our ways were backward, we used to live like kings and queens with an abundance of natural resources. I'm not naive to think that we can go back to the past, but I'm here to remind everyone that Africa used to practice sustainability way before climate change became a problem. Taking care of our land, recycling, hand-me-downs, reusing plastic. If you walk in any of our mothers' homes, you will see sustainability in action. Sustainability comes naturally to us, and it's time we went back to our roots, to our habits, to our cultures, but most of all, to our own financing. Can we really do this? Yes. How? We have a wealth of resources. We have the world's largest youth population who are ready to drive change. Brilliant minds, innovators, problem solvers. You know, this is not a data problem. This is a mindset problem. And if we shift our mindsets, we'll be able to shift the way we approach all our challenges. The problem is we've been socialized to believe, and I like to call this colonization of the mind, that the only way we can make progress as a continent is if we get foreign aid. So we continue to come up with brilliant ideas that sit around gathering dust because we are waiting for what? Foreign aid. How will we ever know what Africa youth is capable of if we never get an opportunity to become self-sufficient? I have seen countries that used to be desert and swamps rise up to become self-sufficient economies. Israel, Singapore, UAE, trading their natural resources for money. Africa has the most valuable natural resources, yet we continue to depend on foreign aid. Gold, copper, oil, the list goes on and on. With all these natural resources, the conversation shouldn't be one of borrowing, but one that allows us to become equal players, decision makers, coming into the table from a position of power and not from a position of disadvantage.
Thank you, Bilha. I mean, I'm enjoying this, but we have to keep it within time. So the same question goes to Timbi. Has foreign aid historically hindered our true progress in Africa? Or is foreign aid a key enabler for skilling solutions? What's your take?
Yes, so we think that as team opposition that foreign aid in this context is a key enabler because climate finance, because we need to identify that component of climate finance in foreign aid, over and above the overarching definition of foreign aid as we have it. We need to understand that climate finance, as opposed to mainstream foreign aid, is not charity. It's not just a handout being extended. It's a moral and legal obligation. And this brings us to two critical components, long-standing principles in international environmental law. That's the polluter pays principle and the common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities. When you look at the United Nations Global Convention on Climate Change, particularly Article 4, Article 11, Article 12, Article 21, and even the Paris Agreement of 2015, Article 2, Article 6, Article 9, Article 10, Article 11, Article 13. These, and of course, we've had some other bilateral arrangements establishing legal obligations on developed parties, many of which are historical emitters. For example, the US in this context is the hugest historical emitter in the world. The US has contributed 25% of global historical CO2 emissions, 25%. And Africa, when you look at Africa, Africa has contributed less than 4%. Actually, the Global Carbon Project puts it at about 3.8%, right? So the team from opposition is telling us that Africa must be self-reliant to a point of clearing a mess it did not create. And so we are saying that is false. We must hold the United States accountable for historical emissions, and they against the principle that the polluter must pay for their pollution they're creating, that the US must be able to pay for the cleanup that is happening across the world through climate mitigation and adaptation.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm sorry, but we got it. I mean, it's really enlightening, but we got to go ahead, people. So our next question is this caught is the cut in foreign aid an opportunity to strengthen regional climate finance strategies and especially within the private sector investments, or should wealthier nations honor their pledges since global climate finance commitments are about climate justice? Team 4, you always first, team 4.
Okay, I can go this time round. Here's the thing, and this is what I truly believe. I believe that only Africa knows what Africa needs. Our climate challenges and solutions cannot be coming from the global north. Our culture is different, our problems are different, our relationship to food and consumption is different. The challenges that we continue to face with climate change in Africa is because we keep applying solutions that are not for us. I believe in global collaboration, but I don't believe that this collaboration should come with strings attached, where every aid comes with limitations and conditions that hinder true progress. Aid that tells us that the only way to become developed is by adopting habits and cultures that don't naturally belong to us. Maybe by becoming self-sustaining, we can teach the world a thing or two about habits and mindsets and cultures that can be of great benefit to them too. But that can only happen if we're equal players in the table.
Thank you, Bilha. So Bilha, thank you. The same question goes to either Valentine or Howard. Is the cutting foreign aid an opportunity to strengthen Africa's regional climate finance strategies, especially in private sector investments, or should wealthier nations honor their pledges since global climate finance commitments are about climate justice? What's your take?
So, as team opposition, this is our take. That is the very embodiment of climate injustice. And that is what the proposition is peddling. That Africa, which is the least contributor to the climate crisis at about 3.8% historically, and yet suffering the sharpest brunt of the climate crisis, should then, over and above the shortfalls, the budgetary shortfalls that Africa has, we should then bear the burden of cleaning up someone else's mess. We are saying that is not true. What should be happening is this, that even when we want to catalyze local markets, for example, to incentivize the private sector, we still need to sort of stimulate the African market. And that still needs investment. And a bit of the investment, of course, has to come from historical emitters to be able to build the capacity of, when it comes to technological transfer, when it comes to finance for mitigation and adaptation, there is a moral and legal obligation. I've seen someone say the Paris Agreement is not binding, but I need to let that person know that when you look at the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, Article 26 and 27, which establishes the principle of pacta sunt servanda, when sovereign states undertake obligations at an international level, they do so in good faith, and so they become binding. Whereas there's no punitive or complex enforcement mechanism, they are binding, and failure to comply is a violation proper. So we think that the injustice there is that Africa, which is contributing the least and suffering the sharpest part of the climate crisis, is then expected to get into debt, to expend the resources that are, already, being competed for locally, to then be able to address the climate crisis. We are saying that is not right. The right thing to do is to avail concession and grant funding in consonance with the spirit behind the United Nations Framework Convention and the Paris Agreement, because there is an obligation on developed party states to avail this funding to developing parties because they are major historical emitters. And so, against the principle of polluter pays and the common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities, this funding must be availed to address historical injustices. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Howard. I am enjoying this, people. Our next question, will reducing foreign aid make it harder for African countries to access climate finance globally, or would it push for more localized, innovative financing measures? Raissa or Bilha, you can answer this for me, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for the question. The U.S. foreign aid cut provides an opportunity for African nations to strengthen regional climate finance frameworks and promote cross-border collaborations. African-led innovatives can deliver tailored solutions that reflect the local realities and needs. So the African Adaptation Initiative established by the African Union is an example of that. This initiative supports climate resilience through African-driven solutions. Expanding and investing in such programs reduces reliance and external aids. In addition to that, when we have our own initiative to implement in our own continent, we answer the urgent needs of our continent without any conditions from the donors or any external influence. So the what else in the context of Africa, building like self-resilience in climate change is an urgent need for us to manage our problems in the climate change impacts in our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niriko. So excuse me, Valentine and Howard, will the reduction in foreign aid make it harder for African countries to access climate finance globally, or will it push for more localized, ineffective financial modules? What's your take?
Well, I do feel like when we speak about foreign aid, I feel like climate finance has been, caught in the crossfire at a very wrong time. And maybe compared to other areas where we've truly had, let's say, loopholes into management of, foreign aid funds and all that, I feel like it would be very unfair to sort of just leave climate finance issues and projects out there in the dry in the name of pulling out foreign aid without really looking at what's been happening on ground. I'll give an example of some of the projects I've been part of and different types of foreign aid, quote unquote, that have been effective. We now have the concept of blended finance, where when you're coming up with sort of like a fund model, instead of having just commercial capital on board, you can have funds from like maybe grants, government money in the initial phases of a project. And we're looking at climate finance as climate finance is actually very capital intensive. And the truth is that if you look at the current situation in most African nations, we can barely raise funds for, basic consumption. So if we start eating into that, we are sort of in a catch-22 situation where we'll then end up in a debt trap because we are forced to borrow at very high rates. And that I think when addressing foreign aid in the context of climate finance, it's very important to look at the economies of scale and the amount of financing needed to just get to a point where maybe an infrastructure or energy project is scalable to a point where it can say supply let's say renewable energy to maybe more than 1 million Kenyans or 1 million Africans. So my point or my argument is that let's stop looking at foreign aid as, the handouts that have been coming out in form of, mismanaged funds in health and all that, and look at it from a point of what is it that the US has that can sort of trickle down into Africa, not in the form of hard cash, but maybe in terms of technology, in terms of education. After all, a lot of the professionals or people on ground who, maybe do this work and implement climate finance projects, you find that their background is more or less Western or in the US. So if you can find a way of, international cooperation that's not tied to all these holes we are poking on foreign aid.
Thank you, Valentine. Thank you, Valentine. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, but we got to go. All right. So for the sake of time, at this point, we will entertain questions and comments from our audience. We will take, please, if you're commenting, you can limit your comment to 1 minute, or if you're asking a question, please stay within the time frame of 1 minute. So The audience, the question and answer portion is all yours. If you want to make a comment or have a question, yeah, you can just raise your hand and then we can recognize you. All right, I see Lisa.
Okay, thank you, and I'm enjoying this discussion. My name is Lisa. I'm from Kenya, but currently based in Uganda. And my question is linked to what Valentine has talked last. I think with UNFCCC, even right now that the member states are reporting on their biennial reports on their progress with implementation of the Paris Agreement. The Western countries are also supposed to support us not only with funding but also technical capacities, as you're saying, through education, through bringing infrastructure. But most of them, they don't do that. They give us money, and I believe for me it's because they want us to keep on the cycle of aid and loans. They don't I Maybe you can educate me, because you're in investment, if we have an example of Westerners who come in and do tangible infrastructural projects for us or build our capacity as a form of climate financing, or supporting us as a as a responsibility of their emissions and the impacts that they are having in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for that question. Valentine, you wanna?
I think then, Lisa, that comes to the point of personal responsibility, where if you have documentation written down saying you're going to get soft technical soft aid, and you're continuously accepting hard cash and not being accountable down the line, then I think that's where the problem is. If we do know that we have maybe problems with early stage financing, maybe piloting, and the research and development cost needed at the initial stages, then it seems that the problem is then internal, because then the money hasn't done its work. But then, based on my background, I've been in environments and on projects where we've received support in the form of soft aid, but then directly tied to what the fund is supposed to do. So if you're maybe raising capital for maybe a set of climate finance projects, and you notice that the deals you're getting on ground, maybe the companies are struggling with governance, accounting and all that, you don't give cash to the company and say, go hire an accountant. You place an accountant in-house and then fund the costs that come with having the accountant on board. So I think it's more or less like an internal problem, and if it's an issue of cash mismanagement, then that's an internal problem that even if foreign aid goes away, we'll still end up mismanaging our own resources.
Thank you, Valentine. Thank you. So if anyone wants to ask a question, for the sake of time, I ask that you drop your question in the chat and then I can read it out. So our next question is from Alexandra. He says, I agree with the motion. However, my question is about the role of youth in raising collective awareness amongst African decision makers, emphasizing that they should not necessarily rely on external aid to address critical issues such as climate finance. What is your suggestion for us, young climate activists? I think this question is for Team 4. So Bilha or Raissa, can you address this question?
Yes, I'm happy to address that question because I'm very passionate about youth action and how youth can play a role in completely changing this narrative and story. For me, it's very simple. Africa can make money. Africa has shown that it can make money. In the private sector, there is a lot of investment, there's a lot of profit going on. So it's not that we don't know how to make money, it's that we've been wired that the easiest way to make money is by receiving money from other sources. That's foreign aid. So imagine if we could come up with climate finance strategies that allow African countries to benefit from each other through barter trade, leaning into each other's strengths, maybe trading resources as well as expertise across the board, just to kind of fasten the progress towards self-reliance, localized innovative finance models that we African youth are brilliant enough to come up with, putting into consideration finance models that put into consideration our strengths, our challenges, and our opportunities. I keep saying only Africa knows about Africa, and we are the ones to best come up with the solutions to our problem. It may be hard in the beginning, true, but we are the world's largest youth population. I believe we are brilliant and we are smart, and we have the opportunity to change this narrative.
Thank you, Bilha. Thank you so much. So our next question is from No, and she's asking, why do we say, quote, climate justice, unquote, if Africa can solve the crisis using its own plans and resources? Why is it a justice problem? So, Howard, you want to take on this?
Yes, I'll gladly take that on. And that is precisely our case as team opposition. That even if Africa were to be in position to pay up or to facilitate its climate finance, right, it will still be an injustice. Why? Because Africa is not a historical emitter. Africa, as we said in the beginning, has hitherto contributed only 3.8%. And then you have the US, which has contributed 25% of global historical CO2 emissions. That's over a quarter, right? So we are saying that we must hold the United States accountable. We must hold all historical emitters accountable in light of the principle that the polluter must pay for their pollution, in light of the principle with common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities. We must take note of the fact that historical emitters must be held accountable. In fact, when you look at why the US is withdrawing funding, as manifest, for example, in the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, you withdraw from the Paris Agreement, so you're no longer bound to make any contribution. And we are saying that Africa is not even able, because as you know, the statistics that we have from the Global Carbon Atlas, even the United Nations Environment Program, they indicate that there's a big shortfall because Africa needs about $100 billion until 2050 to facilitate only adaptation without considering mitigation. And the Global Center on Adaptation has noted that every single year, Africa is already meeting about a 10% deficit in facilitating its adaptation needs. So we say that that is climate injustice. Justice would be historical emitters paying up for historical emissions because they are the polluters and they must pay up to clean their pollution.
Thank you so much, Howard. Thank you. So I have a sort of a comment, a question but I'm going to use it as a comment anyway. It's from Moyenyi. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm sorry. I hate to mispronounce people's names because I hate for my name to be mispronounced. But anyway, this person says, if this aid were completely successful, does it mean we are also responsible for the growth of foreign economies, especially since they grew through the exploitation of African labor, in parentheses, slave trade, particularly in agriculture? Africans have long been skilled in farming, and these economies benefited from that labor. Does this mean we deserve a share of the wealth they built? We aren't debt collectors. Instead, we have the potential to unite as one strong African family and grow our economies through alternate methods without resorting to action that could be seen as debt collection. All right, thank you for your comments and your thoughts. So our last question we're going to take for now is from Tenge, and her question is, why do we call it an aid if it is a compensation for climate justice? So I think this question would be for either Raissa or Bilha. Bilha, Raissa, are you guys on?
Yes, we are. No, I actually think that it's a question that should be answered by the opposing team, because we don't believe in this aid. We are advocating for a self-sustaining Africa. And just to give context to what it is we're discussing and why this is important, it is important for us to understand that aid is help. Let's just call a spade a spade. We're not equal players in the market. We're not partners. This is not a situation where we've gone onto the table, we've requested for something and gotten something else in return. And aid, help, always comes with strings attached. It always has. We've been relying on Western aid for years. Nothing has changed. Nothing transformative has happened. This is a time for us to change that. Perhaps let's go back, because this is a situation where we can't have our cake and eat it. We want to get aid, but we don't want to get aid with strings attached. That's not going to happen, guys. So let's focus on building our own finance systems. It is possible. It can happen. It's not far-fetched.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bilha. I know, Team B, you want to give a response to this question. So just hop right in, Valentine or Howard.
Again, I insist, foreign aid is just one of the many faces of foreign influences. So we can't just come to the ground and say, let's get rid of foreign aid, and we don't have, and the options left on the ground is borrowing, and the people who determine the rates and all that are still, the same players in the field. This is going to force Africa into, even worse, bad trade deals, if I can call it that, with, China, Russia, and other players who are willing to ignore risk premiums and whatever it is. Those terms you're referring to that are, now within the foreign aid space are now going to come and count as full-fledged in risk premiums and, all the workings that come into determining the risk and return profile of African countries. So I believe if you're going to pull out foreign aid, we really need to pull out the entire, complete foreign influence in Africa in terms of corruption. A large part of the, corrupt resources are unfortunately not in Africa. Hard currency assets in the Caymans and in any offshore funds and anywhere where, you have legal loopholes. So unless we start from the top and cut off the head, foreign aid is just, one small part of the problem.
Thank you.
Maybe just 1 minute to add to what Valentine said, and that's very crucial. I think
1 minute, Howard, 1 minute. Thank you. You can just go over here for 1 minute. Thank you.
Yes, I think where Bilha and Raissa get this debate wrong is their conceptualization of climate finance and its place in aid generally. So there is mainstream aid, but we're saying that the difference here is that climate finance is not charity, right? There is a moral and legal obligation behind climate finance. I alluded to several provisions in the UNFCCC, in the Paris Agreement, that establish the legal obligation that these nations have in light of the principle, the polluter pays principle, but also the common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities principle. In fact, even if Africa were to be able to leverage its natural resources, which it can't because of the financial structure issues, even if Africa were able to leverage its natural resources to solve the climate crisis, it will still be an injustice. Why? Because Africa will be using its resources to solve a problem which it did not create, yet the people who created the problem have the resources to solve it. So what we must do, we must not condone them withdrawing funding. We must call them out, hold them accountable to contribute to the solution to a problem they created. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Howard. All right, it's getting heated up. Bilha, I see your hand up.
30 seconds. I just need 30 seconds to respond to that. No, I understand very clearly what foreign aid is, and that's the reality. We can call it climate financing, we can call it all these things. But here's the thing. The Paris Agreement was not a legally binding agreement, which means we cannot make America do what America doesn't want to do. So we can either spend years and years going to COP after COP shouting, or we can use and preserve that energy and start looking inward so that we can come up with solutions so that we don't find ourselves in this space to begin with. We've all seen the number of jobs that have been lost, the number of projects that have stalled because USAID has left the market. Let's not pretend we don't know exactly exactly what foreign aid means. We understand what it means, and it means crippling Africa. All I'm saying is that we need to go back to the drawing table so that we come back as equal players in the market. And that means we need to be self-sustaining.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Bilha. Right on time. Since you are already in motion, you can be the first to start your closing and argument and just continue on from where you once you were speaking. And so you have 2 minutes, Bilha. So go ahead.
Valentine or Bilha?
Bilha. She was already in floor, so I figured she would want to continue in her closing arguments.
I mean, I needed a minute, but it's okay. I can close.
All right. If you need a minute,
right.
Raissa can go first.
Okay, cool.
So Raissa, you can go first with your closing argument.
Okay, from my point, it's the climate justice in Africa is I would say that the climate justice in Africa should the climate justice in Africa should work for our needs. And I mean, when I mean that we don't need any, we should more sustainable from our own to take care of our climate future. It doesn't mean that we don't need any help from the others. But what I mean when I am for the motion is that we have to be able to address the climate issues in our country, in our continent, without external aids. So even though there is a cut down from the other donors, we should able to finance our climate adaptation. And what I want to do is that even as long as we are staying more dependent, we are still more dependent on the foreign aids. We are more vulnerable from the climate change impact in our continent. So let's work together to address the climate issue in our continent. Let's build a more sustainable solution in our continent, and bring more reform frameworks in climate finance in Africa from our government. That's
Thank you. Thank you so much, Raissa. Thank you. Bilha, I think you've had enough time to catch your breath. So
Yes.
Go ahead, girl.
Yes. I think I have. I needed to just pull off all the heat from
I
our
know.
To put this into context for everybody, Africa, as it currently stands in its natural resource, and this is not just in the gold and the copper and the oil, but also in its hydrogen, for example, can single-handedly solve 80% of the world's climate issues. I just need you to understand how big a player we are so that we don't keep thinking ourselves as people who are vulnerable. We are not victims. Africa is not a victim. We are giants, and we need to start thinking ourselves as that. It is time that we shifted the narrative from one of dependency and aid that continues to perpetuate negative narratives about Africa being needy. And now it's time for Africa to get into the chat as an equal player. I am not saying that we shouldn't collaborate with other countries. I am saying that we need to collaborate with other countries as equal partners and players. Not handouts that continue to keep us in a cycle of debt, but also as but from a place of power. We must remember who we are as Africa. We are innovators, we are builders, we are problem solvers. This is our opportunity to reclaim our power and build a self-sustaining Africa for ourselves and for our children.
Thank you, Bilha. Thank you so much. All right, Valentine and Howard, you have the floor.
So I know just to piggy off, Bill, it's a bit hard to piggy off on, you know, the opposing the other team. But then the thing is, it's important to first of all look at the metrics, and to sometimes the world right now is full of a lot of noise. Yeah. Foreign aid, if you look at the numbers, it's probably $42 billion against, you know, a US budget of $6 trillion US, which is less than 1%. And Africa has always been the punching bag for, you know, so many problems. And maybe right now the problem is really not foreign aid, it's just being used as a crutch, you know, in the political space. But my experience the past 2 years I've seen firsthand the importance of, let me not say aid or you know, as Bilha says it, but I've seen firsthand the benefits that, you know, climate finance projects can really take off when there is support from, you know, international cooperation, international bodies. I've seen firsthand how hard it is to maybe go and do a due diligence on an early stage company and really get it in your mind, and, you know, try to see the gold in the, you know, in the gold in the pile of dirt. So it's a catch-22 situation where we have to be realistic about where Africa is, and sort of maybe change the narrative on the workings of foreign aid as it is right now. A large part of international aid has been short-term based, maybe linked to emergency responses and all that, without having the long-term outlook that climate finance needs. But if we can go back to the drawing board, and as we say, Africa is strong, we are unique and all that, but then it really has to come out in our actions. If we are still at the top of the list in terms of corruption and all that, then pulling off foreign aid is sort of like a band-aid solution. So there are a lot of levers to pull in terms of ensuring that foreign aid in and of itself has the benefits that we expect it to have. And looking at examples like renewable energy, solar panels actually started out in Germany, and it's China that you know, through continuous R&D.
Thank you, Valentine. I'm sorry, but we had to go. So Howard, you're next. You've got 2 minutes. Thank you. We're almost out of time, people.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the case of the opposition, that climate finance is not charity. Yeah, it's not some sort of, you know, help that, you know, is just being extended. It's a moral and legal obligation. It's a justice issue. That's the point we have been making, that Africa should not be expected to pay for pollution it did not create. And so we are saying that we must hold the polluters accountable, because the obligations under the UNFCCC, under the Paris Agreement. And when Bilha is saying that the agreement is not binding, then why does Trump have to first pull out of it to withdraw funding? Because it is binding, and that's the point. When you look at Article 26 of the Vienna Convention, the law of treaties, it is binding. And even if it does not have an enforcement mechanism, it is binding out of good faith, the pacta sunt servanda principle. And so we are saying that we must not expect Africa, over and above the, you know, limited fiscal space and the debt burden, to now use its resources, which we should be using for socio-economic development, to now pay for a problem it did not create. We must hold or historical polluters accountable, and we must be able to see that Africa, which is contributing 3.8%, is not then held to use resources could be using for development for the climate crisis. Those that are historically responsible, the developed economies, against the principle the polluter pays, must be held accountable. So we should be advancing grant financing, concessional funding, to be able to use it to even stimulate the private sector locally in Africa. We should not expect Africa to pay for problems it did not create.
Thank you so much, Howard. What a time we had here, folks. This was a much enlightening conversation, I can tell you. So to our audience, we want to say thank you for tuning in. And we want to encourage you to continue the conversation on our LinkedIn page and our YouTube account. Continue with your thoughts and concerns. Put in your comments, continue the engagement. And I also want you to like keep these questions in mind as you continue to give your contribution. How can Africa build stronger policy frameworks to ensure climate finance ownership and accountability? What alternative financing models can replace foreign aid? How might U.S. foreign aid costs impact Africa's renewable energy transition? And then, should Africa focus on renegotiating foreign aid terms rather than just outrightly rejecting it? I want you to consider these questions and continue the conversation. So thank you to the African Climate and Ambassador Program and Jacob's Ladder Africa. You can find us on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and on YouTube. Continue the conversation, folks. Give us your thoughts and comments, and let's keep this conversation active. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure being here and being your moderator. Thank you so much, team, and do have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Let's connect on our socials.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.